When he raised his hand at me, I didn't even understand what I had done wrong. That sentence echoed in my head as I sat on the worn wooden chair in the kitchen, the smell of the soup I had spent half an hour stirring still lingering in the air, unsalted and steaming. My arm throbbed where his fist had landed, and for a moment, I could hardly breathe. The sound of his heavy footsteps receding down the hallway was almost louder than the slap of his anger against my body. I stayed there, frozen, holding on to the edge of the counter like it could anchor me back to some version of reality where this wasn't happening, where my son didn't just hit me because I had forgotten to add salt to the soup. In the quiet aftermath, I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the drip of water from the tap, the faint rustle of leaves brushing against the window outside. And then came the guilt, that terrible, insidious guilt that gnawed at my chest. I kept asking myself, did I fail him as a mother? Was I too tired, too distracted, too careless? Before this moment, life had seemed ordinary, though ordinary in a warm, comforting sense. My husband had passed a few years ago, and my days had settled into a rhythm with my son, Amir. He was 16, full of adolescent energy and pride, fiercely protective of his own ideas of right and wrong. We shared quiet dinners, laughed at silly television shows late at night, and I knew the scent of his favorite cereal, the way he slouched in the living room chair, and even the small crease he always made in his brow when he was concentrating. Life had a steady, familiar beat, one that could lull you into believing nothing would ever shatter it. I woke up that morning with the sun stretching across the kitchen tiles, the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. I hummed softly to myself as I chopped vegetables for the soup, imagining his face lighting up after a long day at school. There's something sacred about preparing a meal for someone you love. You measure spices carefully, stir gently, taste the broth, and adjust. But that day, my mind had been elsewhere. Bills, appointments, my own lingering fatigue, it all distracted me, and in my rush, I forgot the salt. Just a small oversight, a tiny absence in a steaming pot. Amir came home earlier than usual, slamming the door and throwing his backpack into the corner. I tried to greet him, my voice soft, warm. "Hey, sweetheart, how was school?" I asked, expecting the usual eye roll or shrug. But he barely responded, his eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He didn't move toward the kitchen, he stared at me, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he said, voice low but edged with something sharp, "what is this?" He pointed at the soup, steaming in its bowl, and I froze for a second before the words came. "It's your lunch, honey," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I made your favorite vegetable soup." He sniffed it, frowned, and then something shifted. That familiar warmth between us snapped. "There's no salt," he said flatly, and before I could respond, the anger I had never seen in him before exploded. I recoiled instinctively as his hand hit me. It was fast, sharp, and full of something I didn't recognize. The pain wasn't just physical, it cut deeper, slicing through the trust, the connection, the sense of safety I had in my own home. My knees trembled, and I gripped the counter to steady myself, the metallic taste of shock and fear bitter in my mouth. In that moment, I realized something I had been avoiding. My son wasn't just upset about the soup. Something had shifted inside him, something heavier, more dangerous, and it had been building beneath the surface for a long time. I sank into the chair, the empty bowl in front of me steaming faintly, and I felt a cold, strange clarity. I had to decide, immediately, how I would respond. Not just to the soup, not just to his hand, but to the growing tension in our home, to the part of him that I didn't yet understand. The hours after the incident passed in a strange blur. Amir had retreated to his room, slamming the door with a finality that echoed through the house. I sat in the kitchen, the bowl of soup untouched, listening to the quiet that had once been comforting now feel oppressive. I could still feel the sting on my arm, the tremor in my hands as I tried to steady myself. But even more than the physical pain was the ache in my chest, the disbelief that my own child could strike me over something so trivial. I tried to make sense of it, piecing together the fragments of our daily life. He had been moody lately, yes, but I had brushed it off as teenage angst. The subtle eye rolls, the curt I don't care-s, the slammed doors, they were signs, now painfully obvious, that something simmered beneath his surface. But I had been too busy, too distracted, to notice. And now, here we were, the line crossed in a way that left me shaking. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched soup. The smell of it, vegetables, a hint of herbs, used to be comforting. Now it smelled like betrayal. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my role as a mother, the one constant in his life, had been tested in the most brutal way. And I hadn't been ready. I decided to speak to him, cautiously. I knocked on his door, soft at first, then firmer when no answer came. Amir? Can we talk? My voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of the evening's events. No response. I tried again, stepping closer to the door. Son, I want to understand. Please, let's talk. Finally, a low groan came from inside, and the door cracked open just enough to reveal his face, a mixture of anger, shame, and something else I couldn't yet name. What do you want, Mom? He asked, voice defensive, arms crossed over his chest. I want to understand why you hit me, I said calmly, choosing each word carefully. Not just about the soup, Amir. Something is wrong, and I need you to tell me. His eyes flickered, darting to the floor, then back to mine. You don't get it, he muttered. You never get it. The words were sharp, raw with frustration. You make everything, and you think it's perfect, and when it's not, you don't notice anything else. I swallowed hard. There it was, the first clue that this wasn't just about a forgotten pinch of salt. There was something deeper, some weight he carried that I had missed. I wanted to reach out, to hug him, to say it would be okay, but I also had to protect myself from another blow, from the volatility I didn't yet understand. I know you're upset, I said softly, keeping my distance. But hitting me is never okay. I need to know what's really bothering you, Amir. Please. He looked away, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping the doorframe. Finally, a voice barely above a whisper, it's everything. I feel like I'm living under a microscope. Every little thing I do, you watch. And when I make a mistake, you make it all about yourself. The words cut me like shards of glass. Every late night, every silent observation, every gentle correction I thought was love now felt like judgment to him. And somewhere along the way, the bond one cherished had become a source of tension, a pressure he could no longer contain. I realized, in that moment, that this was not just an angry reaction to soup. This was a buildup of months, maybe years, of unspoken frustrations, miscommunications, and unmet emotional needs. And if I wanted to save our relationship, I had to see it clearly, without defensiveness, without shame, without denial. That night, I stayed in the doorway, giving him space but also letting him know I was there. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a willingness to listen, a fragile bridge back to him. And I knew, deep down, that the path forward would require patience, courage, and a confrontation with truths I hadn't been ready to face. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Amir hadn't come down for breakfast, and I couldn't bring myself to touch the soup pot again. Instead, I wandered through the rooms, my fingers trailing over familiar surfaces, the worn armrest of the couch, the chipped kitchen counter, the framed family photos on the wall. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. There was a tension in the air, a subtle vibration of unease I couldn't shake. I tried to go about my day as usual, tidying the kitchen, watering the plants, putting laundry away, but my mind kept returning to him, my son, my child, my responsibility. I replayed the previous evening, his anger, his words. Each time, I noticed something new, the way his fists clenched, the flicker of guilt in his eyes after the strike, the tremor in his voice when he finally spoke. There was fear there, yes, but more than that, a silent scream for recognition, for understanding, for control over his own life. By midday, I decided I needed to speak with him again, but I knew I had to tread carefully. I left a note on his bedroom door, I'm in the kitchen. I'm not leaving until we talk. Please come when you're ready. I didn't know if he would come. I didn't know if he would respond. But I had to try. He appeared half an hour later, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed and shoulders tight. "You really think a note is going to fix this?" he said, voice laced with sarcasm but also something softer underneath, hesitation, maybe even curiosity. "I don't expect a fix," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I just need to understand. And I need you to understand that I'm here for you, no matter what." He looked at me for a long moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, his posture softened. He stepped into the kitchen and sank into a chair across from me. I poured 2 glasses of water, setting them carefully on the table, the clink of glass punctuating the silence. Finally, he spoke. "I'm not even sure where to start," he admitted. "It's like, I don't know how to tell you everything without it turning into an argument. Or, without me exploding." I nodded, letting him take the lead. "You don't have to start perfectly," I said gently. "Just tell me what's on your mind. One thing at a time." He took a deep breath, the kind that shakes your whole body, and began. "I feel like I'm trapped," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Like no matter what I do, it's not enough. You notice the small things, the mistakes, but not the rest. The stuff I try to do right. I know you love me, but sometimes, it feels like love comes with a weight I can't carry." My heart clenched. I realized how blind I had been, how easily I had mistaken his distance, his frustration, for simple teenage moodiness. I had failed to see the signs, the tiny cracks forming in our relationship. And now, the cracks had widened, spilling over into violence, into something neither of us could ignore. "I hear you, Amir," I said softly. "I hear everything you're saying. And I want to do better. I want to be the kind of mother you can come to without fear, without anger, without tension." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw a glimmer of something I had been missing, vulnerability. Fear. A need for connection. And in that fleeting moment, I felt the faintest hope that we could bridge the gap between us, but only if I acted carefully, with patience, and with unwavering resolve. That day, I realized the first step wasn't punishment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It was listening. Truly listening. The kind of listening that makes someone feel seen and understood, even when the world has been unkind, even when their own actions have been wrong. And I knew this would be the beginning of a longer journey, one that required honesty, courage, and perhaps, a reckoning we both had been avoiding. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle shifts in Amir's behavior. He was quieter, less explosive, but the tension hadn't entirely lifted. I watched him from across the kitchen as he moved through the house, slouching in the living room chair, fiddling with his phone, staring out the window with a distant gaze. There was a weight on his shoulders, one I couldn't remove with words alone. I realized that understanding him wasn't enough. I had to uncover the deeper truth behind the anger that had boiled over so violently. One afternoon, while he was supposed to be finishing his homework, I heard him muttering under his breath. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just teenage distraction, but then I caught fragments. "No one cares, nothing matters, why even try?" My stomach tightened. These weren't the words of a boy angry over soup, they were cries of frustration, of helplessness, perhaps even despair. I approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. "Amir," I said softly. He jumped slightly, then looked away, ashamed, I realized. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, then nodded. He led me to his room, where posters of video games and soccer stars covered the walls, masking the silence beneath. He sank onto the bed, hands clasped tightly together. "Mom," he began, voice low, "it's not just about the soup. It's everything. School, friends, expectations. I feel like I'm drowning, and no one sees it." The words hit me like a blow I hadn't anticipated. My son, the child I had watched grow, had been carrying a burden I hadn't noticed. His frustration at me, at home, was just the surface of something much deeper. "Amir," I said, sitting beside him, "I had no idea you felt this way." I wish you had told me sooner. He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. I didn't know how. Every time I tried, I thought I'd get yelled at, or worse, they wouldn't care. And sometimes, I felt like maybe I deserved it. My chest ached. Here was my child, believing that violence, frustration, and anger were his only options to be seen and heard. And I, the person who should have been his safe place, had failed him. I reached for his hand. You don't deserve to feel that way, Amir. You never have. I see you, I hear you, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure you feel safe to speak, without fear, without shame. For the first time, he let himself collapse into my embrace, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I could feel the tremor in his body, the weight of weeks, maybe months, of unspoken emotions spilling over. I realized then that his act of striking me wasn't just anger, it was a desperate plea for recognition, for help, for the love he knew was buried under expectations and misunderstandings. We sat there in silence for a long time, the only sound the faint tick of the clock on the wall. In that quiet, I made a vow, I would never dismiss his feelings again, no matter how small they seemed. I would listen, guide, and support, but also set boundaries, clear, firm, and nurturing. Violence would never be acceptable, but understanding, communication, and emotional safety would be our new foundation. That evening, I prepared a simple dinner, this time, carefully salted, and invited him to sit with me. He hesitated but eventually joined, the air between us charged but less threatening. And as we ate, I realized the first real step toward healing wasn't about punishment or correction, it was about rebuilding trust, acknowledging pain, and allowing space for the truth to emerge. I understood, finally, that this was only the beginning of a journey. A journey where both of us would need to confront mistakes, fears, and expectations. But it was a journey I was willing to take, hand in hand with my son, because the alternative, ignoring the problem, pretending it never happened, would have been far worse. The next morning, I knew I couldn't let the incident linger in silence. I had to act, not out of anger, but with intention, to restore both our sense of safety and respect. I decided to set clear boundaries with Amir, while also creating a space where he could express himself without fear. I started with a calm, honest conversation at the kitchen table. Amir, I said, voice steady, what happened the other night can't happen again. Hitting me, or anyone, is never acceptable. Do you understand? He looked down at his hands, fidgeting, and mumbled, yeah. I took a deep breath. I know you're frustrated. I know life feels heavy sometimes. But we have to find a better way to handle those feelings. I want to help you, but we have to do it together. No more violence, no more fear, no more silence. He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched, tense but necessary. Then, slowly, he nodded, the tightness in his face softening ever so slightly. It wasn't complete resolution, but it was a start. I realized that rebuilding trust wouldn't come from words alone. Actions mattered. Over the next few days, I made a conscious effort to notice him, not just when he was frustrated or making mistakes, but when he was trying, when he laughed, when he showed even the smallest act of kindness or courage. I praised those moments, quietly, sincerely. I saw how you helped your friend today, I'd say. That was thoughtful. I'm proud of you. It felt strange at first, almost as if I had been blind to all the good in him, but slowly, I saw the effect. Amir began to relax, his shoulders less rigid, his eyes less guarded. Still, I knew one conversation wasn't enough. I needed him to understand the weight of his actions in a way that was real but not cruel. One afternoon, I shared a memory from my own adolescence, a story of a time I had acted out in anger and hurt someone I loved. I regret it every day, I told him. I wish I had found a way to speak my frustration instead of hurting the person I cared about most. He listened, quietly, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. It wasn't a lecture, it wasn't punishment, it was a mirror, showing him the consequences of anger, the ripple effect of one impulsive act. I wanted him to see that hitting me wasn't just about that night or that soup, it was about a pattern of mismanaged feelings, and that pattern could be changed. By the end of the week, I suggested we do something together, just the two of us, a walk in the park, something simple, away from the walls of our home where tension had built. We walked slowly, talking about small things at first, school, friends, soccer. Then, gently, the deeper conversations emerged. He shared frustrations he had never voiced, insecurities he had buried. And I shared mine, not to burden him, but to model honesty, vulnerability, and calm communication. It was during that walk, with the sun warming our backs and leaves rustling underfoot, that I finally felt a shift. There was no magic fix, no instant resolution, but there was movement. Progress. A tentative understanding between us, fragile but real. I knew the next steps would be long, filled with missteps, apologies, and adjustments. But I also knew that taking action with intention, empathy, and firmness was the only way to reclaim the trust that had been broken. Amir needed to feel safe, seen, and heard, and I needed to maintain my own dignity and boundaries. For the first time since that night, I felt a sense of control returning, not control over him, but control over how I responded. And that, I realized, was the foundation for real healing. A week later, the ripple of that night's events began to touch others, though I hadn't intended it. Amir's teacher called, concerned about a bruise on his arm. I explained carefully, without shame, that there had been a family disagreement at home, but I also chose honesty about the nature of the incident. I didn't want to hide it, I wanted to frame it as a moment of learning, not blame. Word spread subtly among family members, too. My sister, visiting for a routine check-in, noticed the tension in our home, the quiet hesitations, the new care in our interactions. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. I told her the truth, choosing to emphasize the lessons rather than the violence, that boundaries had been tested, that emotions had overflowed, and that we were actively working to repair the trust that had been broken. The responses were mixed. Some relatives expressed concern, some surprise, and a few judgment. "Aren't you too lenient?" one cousin asked, eyebrows raised. "He should face consequences." I listened without defensiveness, knowing that the real consequence had already been felt, his shame, his awareness of his actions, and our painstaking efforts to rebuild our relationship. Within the school, the situation sparked conversations as well. Amir's friends began noticing his quieter demeanor, the way he flinched when someone raised their voice. A teacher approached me with care, "He's a good student, but clearly stressed. Is there something going on at home?" I nodded, calmly explaining that we were addressing it together, emphasizing communication and support. It was important to me that he be treated with dignity, not shame, in front of others. One afternoon, Amir came to me, hesitant but determined. "Mom, I want to tell people I'm sorry," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not just to you, to everyone who saw or knew." I felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. "That's a brave step, Amir," I said, squeezing his shoulder. "Apologies matter when they come from understanding, not guilt. It shows you've learned something, and it helps rebuild trust with others." He nodded and drafted notes to his teachers, spoke with his friends, and even shared a quiet, heartfelt apology with my sister when she visited again. The shift in him was subtle but undeniable. There was humility now, a recognition of his own agency, and the realization that actions, even mistakes, carry consequences. But more importantly, he began to see that those consequences didn't have to be devastating if addressed with honesty and effort. The community's reaction was instructive. People respected his accountability, and surprisingly, some of the judgment softened. It wasn't about hiding the truth or pretending nothing happened, it was about owning it with integrity and choosing to grow from it. For Amir, that meant a sense of empowerment and the chance to rebuild relationships strained by anger. I, too, felt a shift. I saw my role differently now, not just as a mother who nurtures, but as a guide who models responsibility, calmness, and emotional intelligence. I had to hold firm boundaries while also providing love and support. And in doing so, I found a strange, restorative clarity, the public acknowledgement of mistakes, handled with grace, could heal rather than harm. It was in those weeks, through careful conversation, quiet reflection, and intentional action, that I began to feel the home breathe again. The walls no longer carried tension, but a cautious hopefulness. We were far from perfect, but we were moving forward. And in that movement, I found a lesson that stretched beyond the walls of our kitchen, that consequences, when faced openly and honestly, become opportunities for growth rather than instruments of shame. The following morning, I lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds outside, and the soft footsteps of Amir heading toward school. I realized how fragile and precious peace can be, how easily it can be shattered, and how much courage it takes to rebuild it. As I sipped my tea, I thought back to the night of the soup incident. How quickly anger had erupted, how sharp the pain had been, and how terrifying it felt to see my child's fists where love and trust should have been. And yet, here we were, not untouched, not unscarred, but moving forward with understanding, accountability, and a bond stronger for the trials we had endured. I reflected on the lessons I had learned, the truths I would carry with me forever. Children, even grown or nearly grown, carry storms inside them, storms that sometimes spill over in ways we cannot predict. And as parents, caregivers, or simply those who love them, it is our responsibility to navigate those storms with patience, clarity, and compassion. Firm boundaries are necessary. Accountability is necessary. But so too is love that listens, love that sees, and love that never gives up even when it hurts. I thought about Amir, about the weight he had carried silently, about the courage it took to finally show vulnerability. And I felt hope. Not a naive hope, but a quiet, grounded hope that the lessons learned would shape him into a person who understands the value of respect, the power of communication, and the importance of facing mistakes with honesty. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take from our story, it's this: love is not only about comfort and warmth. It's also about patience, courage, and sometimes facing the very things we fear most: anger, betrayal, silence, so that growth can take place. Even in moments that feel unbearable, change is possible. Healing is possible. And now, I turn to you. If someone you love acts out in ways that shock or hurt you, what would you do? How would you respond, not just with anger, but with intention, empathy, and boundaries? Think about that, and carry it with you. Because sometimes, the hardest moments teach the most important lessons. Would you have found the courage to act as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every story shared brings a little more understanding into the world. Our journey isn't perfect, but it is ours, and it has taught me that even the deepest cracks can become paths to connection, compassion, and strength. The soup may have lacked salt that day, but what we rebuilt had a flavor far richer: patience, respect, and love tempered by understanding. The kitchen was quiet once more, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a deep, steady peace.